Alright, welcome to section 8.2. This is a quick tip. So this is video number 3. This is the last step of the videos. This is what we did not get to in class. So here we go, factoring with opposites. What if you're given this particular scenario? We have 3x squared minus 15, or 3x cubed minus 15x squared plus 10 minus 2x. If you didn't want to actually take the step to actually write it in standard form, sometimes you just don't. But we still have to group terms up, and let's do that. So I just grouped terms up, and I did it mainly because, in the way I did, because I see a 3 here, 15 here. That's a multiple of 3. I have an x to the third and an x squared. That's going to be easy. And I have a 10 and a 2. There we go, 10 and 2. 10 is a multiple of 2. So with that, I feel like I can find some common factors. Okay, I can find a GCF. I can find a greatest common factor. So looking at this 3x to the third and negative 15x squared, I feel like there's going to be a common factor of 3 in there, obviously, because 3 and 15, they're both multiples of 3, and x squared, because that's the biggest number of x I can take out of both terms. So that's my GCF for this one. For this particular situation, looks like the only thing I can take out is a 2. Awesome. So let's now do that math work. If we were to take out 3x squared out of each of these terms in the first grouping, 3x squared we're taking out, so I take out a 3, I'm left with just 1, which I don't need to write. An x squared, and I take out from 3 cubed, I can just come out with an x. Oops, I should have that in a different color. X. In this other term, negative 15x squared, I'm going to say negative 15 because it's like plus a negative. So negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. And x squared divided by x squared, that's 5. Or that's just the 5. We don't need to worry about that. Then we're going to add a 2, which is then multiplied by a whole mess of things. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1, so we can just write negative x. So looking at this, we have an interesting situation. If you look at this, we have 3x squared plus 2, and we have x minus 5 here and 5 minus x here. It looks very similar. However, we know that when you're subtracting things, so x minus 5 is not quite the same as 5 minus x. You're not going to end up with the same issue, or you're not going to end up with the same thing. However, I want to ask you a question. What if I were to do this? 5 minus x, and actually do the following. We all know there's sort of a magical thing that can happen if you multiply by a negative 1, but we know we can't multiply by a negative 1, otherwise we're changing the equation. But what we could do is maybe look at this x. We can maybe think about this x being a negative 1 times x. Well, what if I wanted to factor out a negative 1 from there? And if I were to factor out a negative 1 from 5, I would have negative 1 times a negative 5, because I have a positive 5 there. So if I were to factor out a 1, so this is kind of the same sort of thing we were doing before, but I'm being a little more focused with it because I'm hoping to get x minus 5 out of this situation, because the 5 minus x is hard to deal with. So if I were to factor out a negative 1, bring that out in front, what I am left with is a negative 5 and a positive x. That can be rewritten as negative 1 times x minus 5. We can flip around addition things, right? We can flip that sort of thing around. So we now have the situation where we have 3x squared times x minus 5, oops, wrong color, times x minus 5, I'm going to do that, plus 2, and instead of saying 5 minus x, I'm going to say times negative 1 times x minus 5. I should write this in the correct colors. Okay, so I'm putting this whole thing in for 5 minus x. So looking at that, we can now solve this. We can actually do the moving around of terms. So we have our greatest common factor of x minus 5, and we can bring that out in front. Bring that out in front. And so we have x minus 5, and what is remaining of this first term is 3x squared. And what is remaining of this second term is this, plus 2 times a negative 1. We haven't actually changed this problem at all. All we've done is decided to factor out a negative 1 from this initial part. Factoring out an equation is not quite the same as multiplying something by negative 1 just to change an equation. We have not changed it in the least, and I'll show you after we do a little bit of math. So we have x minus 5 times 3x squared, do this math, plus a negative 2. And now let's do the FOIL method and actually see if this ends up being the same answer as before. So first terms are x times 3x squared, which equals 3x cubed. Outside terms are x times a negative 2, so we got negative 2x. Inside terms, we have negative 5 times 3x squared, which equals negative 15x squared. And last terms, negative 5 times a negative 2, which equals a positive 10. So if I write this all out, I have 3x cubed plus a negative 15x squared plus a negative 2x plus 10, and that looks exactly like my original equation. I hope this was a helpful quick tip. And biggest thing I need you to take away from this is if you have something that looks like this, x minus 6, and you have its opposite, essentially 6 minus x, all you need to do is, for this second part, think about saying this, negative 1 times x minus 6. These are equal. These two statements are the same. 6 minus x is the same as saying negative 1 times x minus 6. So that is the biggest takeaway, the big quick tip that you need to remember for this particular situation. I hope this helps. Thanks.